I know you are ready for a new story, but tonight we are going to dive into a different tale than the usual stories. This one is drenched in imperial purple and blood, where power was a poison drunk willingly, and where the weight of Rome rested on shoulders both willing and doomed. A story of a man who ruled the known world, yet could not rule his own fate. However, I promise this isn't another story. It's a journey into the mind of an emperor who commanded legions but fought his greatest battles within. A descent into palatial halls where every whisper could mean death, where loyalty was as fragile as glass, and where a ruler's thoughts remained his last true sanctuary against the crushing weight of imperial duty. I want to tell you about a time when one man's private thoughts revealed the humanity behind the marble facade of absolute power. When an emperor's personal reflections, never meant for others' eyes, exposed the doubts, fears, and rare joys of ruling an empire that stretched across 3 continents. When behind closed doors, even the most powerful man in the world removed his mask. From the shadows of history emerges a name that shines with imperial glory, Titus Flavius Vespasianus. But who exactly was Titus, the emperor whose brief reign was marked by both unprecedented generosity and unimaginable disaster? The man who completed the Colosseum yet watched Vesuvius bury Pompeii in ash and flame. I challenge you to imagine the weight of the purple robes upon his shoulders, to feel the burden of decisions affecting millions of lives across a vast empire. To understand a man who conquered Jerusalem, who celebrated with a triumph through Rome's streets, yet who would later weep openly at the thought of a day wasted without performing a single act of kindness. But Titus did not simply rule an empire with military might and political cunning. His lost diaries reveal a soul in conflict, a man who understood the fragility of life despite his godlike status. They show us an emperor who, having witnessed both the heights of human achievement and the depths of natural destruction, carried a wisdom rarely found in those who wear the crown. He wasn't born to power or privilege. Titus emerged from the shadow of Rome's forgotten streets, where survival meant cunning and strength before honor. His hands were calloused from labor, not soft from luxury. The empire barely noticed him until fate thrust him into history's unforgiving spotlight, a common man whose uncommon journey would echo through centuries. But beneath the weight of imperial expectation, within Titus's resolute heart, something extraordinary awakened. His voice, preserved in fragments of parchment and clay, speaks to us across millennia with startling clarity. His words reveal not just the events of his era, but the soul of a man who witnessed empire and eternity collide. Are you ready to bear with me as we uncover how an ordinary citizen of Rome navigated the treacherous currents of power, war, and love during the empire's most tumultuous era? Through his eyes, we'll witness glory and ruin, triumph and despair, all captured in the intimate confessions of a life fully lived. Discover how Titus did not merely observe history, but lived within its crushing embrace. His diaries reveal a man who dined with emperors, yet never forgot the taste of common bread, who commanded legions yet understood the cost of each life sacrificed upon the altar of Rome's ambition. He walked the marble halls of power and the blood-soaked fields of conquest with equal measure of duty and doubt. Picture the Senate chambers falling silent as decisions shaping millions of lives were made with a casual gesture. But could Titus maintain his humanity when surrounded by those who traded it so cheaply for wealth and influence? Through these diaries, you'll stand beside Titus as he witnesses the rise and fall of emperors, the whispered conspiracies that toppled dynasties, and the quiet moments of truth and one man's conscience confronted an empire's demands. His words bring to life a Rome not of marble monuments, but of flesh and blood, hope and fear. Now, relax in a comfortable position. Our stories don't require you to watch the video. They are narrated to guide you on a relaxing journey to fall asleep as you listen. Feel your body relaxing, your shoulders, your hips. A warm feeling slowly relaxes your entire body from head to toe as if you are entering a warm bath of soothing water. Your body begins to relax as the water slowly rises from your feet to your legs, your torso, your shoulders. You feel every single muscle becoming more and more relaxed. Feel the comfort of this moment. Focus on the story and allow the narrative to gently lead you toward a comfortable sleep. And now let the world of our heroes begin. I was born in Rome during the 3rd year of Caligula's reign. My first cries echoed through our modest family home as the shadow of the emperor's madness stretched across the city. Father often told me how he held me up to the window that day, showing me the distant forum where power flowed like the Tiber itself. Even then, he whispered of greater things to come for our family. My earliest memories were of Father returning from campaigns, his military cloak dusty from far-flung provinces. I would run my small fingers over his armor, fascinated by the dents and scratches that told stories he wouldn't share until I was older. Mother would scold me for pestering him, but Father always smiled, saying, "The boy must learn what it means to serve Rome." When I was 5, Caligula fell to assassins' blades. I remember the hushed voices, the fear that gripped our household. Father gathered us close that night, explaining how power in Rome was like quicksand. "Today's emperor is tomorrow's condemned memory," he said. I didn't understand then how those words would echo through my life, a warning I would one day heed as emperor myself. Under Claudius, Father's star rose higher. I watched him don the senatorial toga for the first time, purple stripe gleaming. "Remember, Titus," he told me, straightening my small toga, "appearance matters in Rome, but substance matters more." At 7, I began my formal education, my mind drinking in Homer and Cicero, while my body hardened through daily exercise in the Campus Martius. My tutors beat rhetoric into me with the same fervor they taught swordplay. One Greek philosopher would rap my knuckles when I faltered in logic, saying, "The tongue that stumbles loses the argument before it begins." I hated him then, but his lessons saved my life countless times when I later navigated the treacherous waters of imperial politics. At night, I would climb to our roof, gazing at the 7 hills crowned with temples and palaces. Rome sprawled before me, eternal and fragile all at once. I dreamed of commanding legions like Father, never imagining I would one day command them all. Even as a child, I sensed the city's heart beat, its ruthless ambition matching my own growing hunger for greatness. My education began in earnest when I was placed alongside Britannicus, son of Emperor Claudius himself. The palace halls became our classroom, where we studied under Rome's finest tutors. I still remember the first day I entered those marble chambers, my heart pounding against my ribs. the son of a provincial administrator, now learning shoulder to shoulder with imperial blood. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. Literature captivated me from the start. I devoured Homer and Virgil, often staying awake by lamplight long after others had retired. Oratory lessons proved my true strength. My voice could command a room even then. Britannicus and I would compete in mock debates, our young voices echoing through the atrium. He had the advantage of royal blood, but I possessed a natural gift for persuasion that even he envied. Military tactics fascinated me most. While other boys played with wooden swords, I studied the campaigns of Caesar and Scipio Africanus. The instructors noted my unusual focus. How I would reconstruct famous battles using pebbles on the courtyard stones. Even then, something in me understood that Rome's power flowed from disciplined legions. I knew someday I would lead men into battle, not just move stones across marble. Everything changed the night Britannicus died. I had sipped from the same wine pitcher earlier that evening, but his cup alone carried Nero's poison. I watched my friend convulse, his face darkening as life abandoned him. The court pretended it was a seizure, but I knew better. I had tasted the bitter reality of imperial politics, power maintained through calculated elimination. That night, I learned that proximity to greatness carried mortal danger. After Britannicus's death, I retreated into careful observation. The imperial court became my second education, learning which senators held true power, which generals commanded loyalty, which merchants controlled wealth. I watched Nero's excesses grow while documenting who showed disgust and who sycophantic approval. I built alliances quietly, remembering faces, storing away favors for future collection. The palace taught me to wear two faces, one public, one private. The friendships I forged during those years proved invaluable. Licinius Mucianus, later governor of Syria, first shared wine with me in those palace gardens. Young Agricola, who would conquer Britain, practiced swordplay in the same training yard. We were ambitious young men, learning the machinery of empire together. When I finally left Rome's gilded cage for military service, these connections traveled with me. My education had taught me both caution and boldness, when to strike and when to wait. My first taste of true command came in the foggy hills of Britain. Father had arranged my commission, but it was my sword that earned respect. I remember the weight of my first legionary armor, heavier than expected, yet I wore it proudly. The veterans watched me with skeptical eyes. A noble son playing at war, they thought. I would prove them wrong before the moon had waned. The Germanic tribes attacked at dawn, their war cries splitting the morning air. I had positioned our forces along the ridge, a strategy I'd observed my father employ years before. The chaos of that first real battle overwhelmed my senses. The metallic scent of blood, the desperate clash of steel, men's screams melding with battle horns. Yet, amid the madness, my mind found unusual clarity. When our left flank faltered, I led the reserves myself rather than shouting orders from safety. I still feel the impact of that first shield-to-shield collision, the jarring force that traveled through my arm. We pushed forward, step by bloody step. I took a spear graze across my shoulder that day. The scar remains faint, but the lesson permanent. Men follow a commander who shares their peril. Victory brought elation, but counting our dead sobered me quickly. 23 men lost under my command. I knew each name, each face. That night, I visited the wounded, speaking with those who would survive to fight again. The centurions noticed. "Not like other noble boys," I overheard one say. "This one has Rome in his blood, not just his name." No praise ever meant more. Father's strategies formed my foundation, but I soon developed my own approach. Where he favored overwhelming force, I found success in speed and maneuverability. In the Rhineland campaign, we outflanked a force twice our size by marching through terrain the enemy deemed impassable. My scouts found the hidden path. My instinct said to take it. The gamble paid handsomely, a victory that reached the Emperor's ears. Each campaign hardened both my body and resolve. I learned that power flows not from authority alone, but from the trust of those you lead. Standing on Britain's northern frontier, watching our standards snap in the wind, I felt it. The weight of Rome's destiny intertwined with my own. Not merely Vespasian's son anymore, but Titus, commander in his own right. The path to glory stretched before me, written in iron and blood. Reports from Judea arrived while I dined with Father in Rome. The province had erupted in violence. Jews had massacred the Roman garrison in Jerusalem and rejected imperial authority. Father's face darkened as he read the dispatch. "This is different from the usual disturbances," he muttered. I felt a chill. The rebellion would demand a response, and I suspected we would be the ones to deliver it. Judea had always been troublesome, but manageable. Our procurators collected taxes and maintained order, while allowing the Jews their peculiar customs and monotheistic worship. Yet beneath this arrangement simmered resentments. Religious zealots called sicarii assassinated collaborators, while tax burdens crushed the common people. I had studied their history. These people had rebelled before, but never with such coordination. "The strategic value of Judea cannot be overstated," Father explained during our long evening discussions. "It guards our eastern frontier and the approach to Egypt. We cannot allow rebellion to spread." I nodded, understanding the stakes. The province produced valuable goods and taxes. But more importantly, rebellion there might inspire others throughout the East to challenge Roman rule. I respected certain aspects of Jewish culture, their discipline, their ancient traditions, their unwavering devotion to their God. Having encountered their merchants in Rome, I found many to be educated and reasonable. But their refusal to acknowledge the divine emperor and their periodic eruptions of messianic fervor made them perpetually dangerous. This rebellion seemed fueled by both religious fanaticism and genuine grievances. "We must crush this decisively," Father declared after Emperor Nero appointed him commander of the campaign. "But intelligently, Judea must remain productive afterward." I spent nights studying scrolls detailing previous Jewish revolts and Roman campaigns in the region. The terrain favored defenders, and the rebels' fanaticism would make them formidable. This would not be a simple policing action. As we prepared to depart for the East, I found myself both eager and apprehensive. This campaign would test my military abilities as never before. The storm gathering in Judea would shape my destiny and Rome's future in ways I could not yet imagine. Father and I would need every lesson of strategy and leadership we had ever learned. The rebellion had to be extinguished, but at what cost? Father summoned me to his quarters that fateful spring morning. "Titus, you will serve as my second-in-command in Judea." His words hung in the air like a gladius. I felt pride swell in my chest, yet anxiety gnawed at my stomach. To serve under Vespasian, not merely as son, but as lieutenant, meant shouldering Rome's expectations. The rebellion in Judea had festered too long. Emperor Nero wanted it crushed, and Father trusted me to help him deliver victory. The preparations consumed us. 3 legions gathered at our command. The 5th, 10th, and 15th, nearly 18,000 men, plus auxiliaries. I supervised the weapons inspections while Father plotted our sea route. At night, we hunched over maps by lamplight, his finger tracing coastlines as he shared wisdom earned through decades of campaigns. "Remember, Titus," he would say, "in Judea, the land itself becomes your enemy as much as any rebel." Our fleet cut through the Mediterranean like Poseidon's chariot. I stood at the prow of my vessel, tasting salt spray while watching Father's ship lead our armada. The sea journey granted me rare moments of reflection. Would I prove worthy of his trust? The men watched me closely, not as Titus the man, but as Vespasian's son. I resolved to earn their respect through action, not birthright. Each league brought us closer to the challenge that would define us both. Judea unfolded before us, a harsh landscape of sun-baked hills and ancient stone. We established our first camp near Ptolemais, where Father immediately called a war council. I presented my assessment of rebel strongholds while he listened intently, neither undermining nor favoring my words. Later, alone in his tent, he placed his hand on my shoulder. "Your instincts are sound, my son. But remember, patience before aggression." In that moment, I was both commander and child seeking approval. Our first test came at Jotapata, a rebel fortress perched like an eagle's nest among treacherous ravines. Father assigned me command of our eastern forces while he took the western approach. The rebels fought with desperate ferocity. During one assault, a javelin narrowly missed my head. That night, Father didn't reprimand my aggressive tactics as I expected. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "You have courage, Titus. Now you must balance it with calculation." We developed a rhythm in those early months. Father's methodical siegecraft complemented by my swift cavalry maneuvers. The men began to speak of us as the twin eagles of Rome. I treasured these words, yet in private moments doubted I could ever match his strategic brilliance. One evening, after we captured a critical water supply, he confided something unexpected. "You see possibilities I miss, Titus. Together, we are more formidable than apart." Perhaps in this foreign land, we were forging more than victory. The siege of Jotapata tested every skill I possessed as a commander. Our legions arrived to find a fortress city perched atop steep cliffs, its walls manned by determined defenders under Josephus himself. Father had entrusted me with proving my worth, and I knew failure would not be tolerated. The first assault failed miserably. Our men were repelled with heavy losses, stones and arrows raining down upon them from above. I ordered the construction of a massive siege ramp to overcome the city's elevation. For days, the pounding of our battering rams echoed through the valley, a rhythmic thunder that matched my heartbeat. The smell of sweat and dust filled my nostrils as I worked alongside the men, showing them their commander would not ask what he himself would not do. At night, the defenders' torches dotted the walls like earthbound stars. On the 20th day, disaster struck. Our men breached a section of wall that only to be surrounded. From my position on the ridge, I saw the trap closing. Without hesitation, I gathered my personal guard and charged into the fray. The clash of iron, screams of the wounded, and the metallic taste of fear filled the air as I cut a path to our trapped soldiers, leading them back to safety amid a hail of projectiles. That night in my tent, nursing a wound to my shoulder, I realized brute force alone would not take Jotapata. I devised a new strategy, a siege tower taller than any built before, armored against fire and missiles. The men worked with renewed vigor under my direction. We would starve the defenders while preparing our final assault. The city's water cisterns were running dry. Time was our ally now. After 47 days, we took the city at dawn. I led the final assault myself, climbing the siege tower as arrows whistled past. The slaughter that followed haunts me still, the screams, the blood-slick stones, the smell of burning homes. Victory tasted of ash and iron. Among the captives brought before me was Josephus himself, defiant yet dignified. Something in his eyes, intelligence perhaps, stayed my hand when others called for his execution. Josephus spoke to me in Greek, claiming he had foreseen my future ascension. I spared him, making him my interpreter and advisor, a decision that would prove fortuitous in years to come. As we departed Jotapata's ruins, I carried with me hard-won wisdom. Patience outlasts courage, innovation overcomes strength, and mercy can be as powerful as the sword. These lessons would serve me well when Jerusalem's walls later loomed before me. The messenger arrived at our camp in Judea, his horse lathered and heaving. His news struck like lightning. Nero had taken his own life. Rome was in chaos. I remember how my hand trembled as I broke the seal on the Senate's dispatch. 3 emperors in quick succession: Galba, Otho, Vitellius. Men I knew, men of varying merit, grasping for power while Rome bled. I sought my father immediately, found him reviewing siege plans for Jerusalem. Rome burns while we fight in the desert, I told him. The gravity settled into his weathered face as he absorbed my words. That night we spoke in hushed tones by lamplight. "We have choices to make, my son," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of our discussion. "Continue here as loyal servants, or seize this moment." Father paced our tent. "Vitellius is unworthy of Rome," he muttered. I agreed, but counseled caution. "The Eastern legions respect you," I reminded him. "We have the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 10th, 12th, and 15th at our disposal." I saw the calculation in his eyes. For the first time, I glimpsed not just my father, the general, but perhaps my father, the emperor. I dispatched trusted centurions to gauge the loyalty of our legions. Meanwhile, I arranged a meeting with Tiberius Alexander, prefect of Egypt. His support would be crucial. Egypt's grain could feed our armies or starve Rome itself. Alexander received me warmly in Alexandria. "Your father is a man of merit," he said, swirling his wine, "unlike these pretenders." By nightfall we had his pledge. Securing Mucianus, governor of Syria, proved more challenging. Old rivalries with father complicated matters. I invited him to a private hunt, away from prying ears. As we tracked deer through Syrian forests, I spoke of Rome's plight. Vitellius surrounds himself with flatterers while the empire crumbles, I said. Mucianus nodded slowly. Perhaps it's time for men of substance to act, he replied. Each night I wrote detailed accounts of Rome's situation based on reports from our spies. Information was our weapon. The legions grew restless, hungry for purpose beyond this Jewish rebellion. Father and I walked among them, listening to their grievances. They'll follow you, I told him under a Judean moon. They'll proclaim you emperor. Father looked at me, his eyes reflecting starlight. Then we make our move soon. The summer air hung heavy with anticipation as the eastern legions gathered on the dusty plain outside Alexandria. I stood beside my father, watching the sea of faces turn toward him. It began with a whisper from the prefect of Egypt, then spread like wildfire through the ranks. "Imperator Vespasian," they shouted, shields raised high. My father's weathered face betrayed little, but I felt the weight of history shifting beneath our feet. The ceremony unfolded with martial precision. One by one, the legionary standards were brought forward, each adorned with golden eagles that caught the Egyptian sun. The men swore their sacred oaths to my father, no longer just their general, but Emperor of Rome. My chest swelled with pride, yet my mind raced. As the cheers echoed across the plain, I realized what this meant. The Jewish campaign was now mine alone to command. That night, my father summoned me to his quarters. Maps of Judea were spread across his table, illuminated by oil lamps that cast long shadows across his now imperial features. "Titus," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Jerusalem must fall, not just for Rome, but for our family's future." He placed his calloused hand on my shoulder. "The Flavian name depends on your victory as much as my journey to Rome." Father outlined his strategy with characteristic precision. Keep Cerealis and Trajanus close. They have good heads. Trust the 5th and 15th legions with the hardest fighting. His eyes narrowed as he tapped Jerusalem on the map. The city has 3 walls. Take them methodically. No rushing. I memorized every word, knowing these might be his final instructions before Rome claimed him. Dawn would bring our separation and my test. The morning my father departed for Rome, I assembled the legions. My voice carried across the parade ground with a confidence I did not entirely feel. "Men of Rome, our emperor marches to claim his throne. We remain to claim Jerusalem for his glory." Their response, a thunderous roar and clash of spears against shields, steadied my resolve. I was no longer just Vespasian's son. I was their commander, responsible for thousands of lives and Rome's honor. Alone in my tent that night, doubts assailed me. Could I match my father's military genius? Would Jerusalem's defenders break our siege as they had others? I paced until exhaustion claimed me, then dreamed of crumbling walls and burning temples. I woke before dawn, clarity washing over me like cold water. I would not be my father. I would be myself. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, who would bring Jerusalem to its knees and secure a dynasty. I spent the winter months meticulously studying Jerusalem's defenses. Maps were spread across my table as I plotted our approach. The city sat upon 2 hills, surrounded by 3 formidable walls on vulnerable sides, with deep valleys offering natural protection elsewhere. I sent scouts disguised as travelers to report on gate positions, wall thickness, and garrison strength. Jerusalem would not fall easily, but every fortress has its weakness. I seized the surrounding towns methodically, cutting off Jerusalem's supply routes one by one. Jericho fell first, then Lydda and Jamnia. Each victory tightened our noose around the holy city. Most satisfying was learning of the 3 factions fighting within Jerusalem's walls, Eleazar, John, and Simon, tearing at each other like wolves while I circled outside. Their division would be our advantage, their hatred for each other stronger than their hatred for Rome. The logistical challenge proved immense. I requisitioned every available wagon in Syria to transport our siege engines. Forests were felled for timber to build rams and towers. Thousands of pack animals brayed in our growing camps as supplies flowed in grain, dried meat, wine, and water stored in vast quantities. My engineers devised new artillery designs, specifically for Jerusalem's unusual defenses. We would be prepared for a lengthy siege. I attempted diplomacy before bloodshed. Jewish emissaries were received with respect, offered generous terms for surrender. Your God's temple will remain untouched, I promised. Your customs honored if you lay down arms. Some seemed tempted, but returned to report the zealots had executed those who merely spoke of peace. The fanatics preferred death to submission. So be it. I would grant their wish, though it saddened me to contemplate the coming slaughter. Father's new dynasty rested partly on my shoulders. Failure at Jerusalem was unthinkable. Each night I studied the campaigns of Pompey and other generals who had taken the city before. I drilled the legions relentlessly, creating specialized units for wall scaling, gate breaking, and street fighting. Veterans who had fought in the narrow alleys of other eastern cities shared their knowledge with younger soldiers. No detail was too small for my attention. By spring, my force had swelled to 4 full legions plus auxiliaries, nearly 60,000 men. The siege engines were assembled, the supply lines secured. From my hilltop vantage, I surveyed Jerusalem gleaming in the distance, its white stone walls and golden temple roof catching the sun, beautiful and defiant. I felt a moment of regret for what was to come, then hardened my heart. The die was cast. Within days, we would march. I arrived at Jerusalem in early spring of 70 A.D. with 4 legions at my command. As we crested the final hill, the holy city came into view, its massive walls gleaming in the morning light. My breath caught. Jerusalem stood defiant and magnificent. 3 rings of ancient fortifications protected it, with the Temple Mount rising above all. I had conquered many cities for Rome, but this one would test everything I had learned. I positioned my legions strategically around the city. The 10th Fretensis took the Mount of Olives to the east, the 12th Fulminata the north, the 15th Apollinaris the west, and my father's favorite, the 5th Macedonica, guarded the south. We constructed our camps with the precision that makes Rome's armies unmatched. Perfect squares with straight roads, watchtowers at each corner. Jerusalem was now encircled by Roman efficiency. Our scouts brought valuable intelligence. The defenders were divided against themselves. 3 factions fought for control within John of Gisela's zealots held the temple. Simon Bar Giora controlled the upper city, and Eleazar's faction was entrenched elsewhere. They burned each other's food supplies while we watched. I smiled at this fortune. Rome need only wait while Jerusalem devoured itself from within. The city's defenses were formidable. 3 walls on the vulnerable northern approach, natural valleys protecting the other sides. The temple itself was a fortress. I walked our perimeter daily, studying weaknesses. Water would be their first crisis. Jerusalem relied on cisterns within. I ordered all aqueducts cut and springs diverted. Hunger and thirst would weaken them before our rams ever touched their gates. Before committing to full assault, I attempted negotiation. I sent Jewish prisoners to speak of mercy for those who surrendered. I had Josephus call out terms from beyond arrow range. Their response? Stones and insults. The defenders crowded the walls, shouting that they preferred death to Roman rule. Their courage was admirable, if misguided. I ordered a full parade of forces, a display of inevitable Roman victory they foolishly ignored. Standing before those ancient walls, I felt the weight of history. Jerusalem had defied mighty kingdoms before, Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, yet all eventually claimed it. Now it was Rome's turn, and I would be the instrument. My father had entrusted me with this task. As the sun set behind the city, casting long shadows across our camps, I swore that Jerusalem would fall, not just for Rome's glory, but for mine. Dawn broke blood red as I ordered the assault on Jerusalem's outer wall. The earth trembled beneath the advance of our siege engines. Massive wooden towers wheeled forward under the protection of testudo formations. From my elevated position, I watched as the 1st, 5th, and 10th legions moved in perfect coordination, each assigned their section of wall. The air filled with the screech of pulleys as our scorpions and ballistas took aim at the defenders. The Jews fought with desperate courage. Arrows and stones rained down upon my men, but our artillery answered in kind. The thunderous impact of our battering ram, which my men had named Victory, echoed across the valley. I rode closer to inspire the troops, ignoring my advisor's protests. A javelin suddenly whistled past my ear, striking my standard bearer. I refused to retreat. My father had taught me that a general who wouldn't share danger deserved no victory. By midday, our ram had weakened a section of wall near the Hippicus Tower. I ordered all artillery to concentrate fire there, suppressing the defenders. The cracking of stone grew louder until with a thunderous roar, the wall gave way. I raised my sword and the legionaries surged forward through the breach. The narrow gap became a slaughterhouse as my men fought their way into the city, shields locked, short swords stabbing in disciplined rhythm. The streets beyond the wall became a maze of death. The Jews had barricaded intersections and positioned archers on rooftops. I quickly adapted our tactics, dividing the legionaries into smaller, more mobile units. I ordered the 10th to secure our flanks, while the 5th pushed forward. Houses became fortresses, every doorway a potential ambush. The fighting was intimate and savage, nothing like the ordered battles of open fields I had known in Britannia. As dusk approached, we secured the entire northern quarter. I walked among the wounded, clasping forearms with bloodied men who struggled to stand at attention. 63 Romans had fallen, hundreds more bore injuries. I knew each death would be reported to Rome as a number, but here they were men I had known. I ordered their bodies carried with honor back to camp, and their names recorded for proper rites and remembrance. That night, by lamplight in my tent, I studied maps of the inner city. The first wall had fallen, but 2 more remained. The Jews would fight even harder for each foot of ground. I traced the path to the Temple Mount with my finger, calculating the cost in Roman blood. This siege must end quickly, not just for Rome, but for the defenders as well. I decided then that tomorrow would bring either surrender terms or an assault of unprecedented ferocity. After weeks of preparation, I ordered the assault on Fortress Antonia. This stronghold was our key to the Temple Mount, a massive structure adjoining the temple's northern wall. I gathered my most trusted officers under the cover of darkness. The fortress towered above us, its 4-cornered turrets like vigilant sentinels. My heart pounded as I explained our strategy. We would need every advantage to overcome this obstacle that had repelled all previous attempts. I ordered the implementation of our specialized tortoise formation. Soldiers locked their shields overhead and at the sides, creating an impenetrable shell against the rain of stones and arrows. Our men advanced slowly but steadily. The Jews fought with desperate courage, hurling everything they possessed down upon us. I remained at the front, directing operations, refusing to ask my men to face dangers I would not. The air filled with the clash of metal and cries of the wounded. Our first assault faltered against their defenses. I gathered my engineers and devised new approaches. We constructed taller siege towers and reinforced our battering rams. The Jewish defenders showed remarkable ingenuity, countering each of our innovations. I admired their resolve, even as it frustrated me. That night, I walked among my wounded men, listening to their concerns. By dawn, I had revised our strategy. We would attack from multiple points simultaneously, stretching their defenders thin. On the 4th night, fortune favored us. A small party of my legionaries discovered a weakness in the northwestern tower. I personally led a select force through this opening. The fighting was brutal, room by room, corridor by corridor. My sword grew slick with blood. The defenders retreated deeper into the fortress, but I sensed their resolve weakening. By midnight, we had secured a foothold inside Antonia's walls, the first breach in Jerusalem's inner defenses. Dawn revealed our triumph. The fortress had fallen. I stood upon Antonia's highest tower, surveying the Temple Mount below. The morning sun gleamed off the temple's gold facade, a sight of breathtaking beauty. Yet between us and that magnificent structure lay more defenses, more desperate men. I felt no joy in this victory, only grim determination. The cost had been high. Hundreds of my finest men lay dead or wounded. The Jews had fought with valor worthy of Rome itself. I summoned my officers to plan our next move. From our new vantage point, Jerusalem's inner sanctum lay exposed before us. The temple would be next. There was no avoiding it. I ordered the construction of assault ramps connecting Antonia to the Temple Mount. As my men worked, I watched the Jewish defenders preparing their final stand. With Antonia fallen, the outcome was inevitable. Yet something told me the hardest fighting still lay ahead. These people would not surrender their holy place without extracting a terrible price. The day I had dreaded arrived. Jerusalem's temple stood before us, magnificent in gold and stone. Josephus had pleaded with the zealots to surrender, but they refused. As battle raged through the outer courts, a soldier, acting without orders, hurled a burning torch through a window. I shouted commands to extinguish the flames, but my voice was lost in the chaos. The fire caught, spreading with terrifying speed. I ordered water lines formed, desperate to save the structure. History would later question my sincerity, but gods bear witness. I wanted that temple intact. The heat became unbearable as the flames climbed higher. Marble cracked with sounds like thunder. The defenders' wails mingled with my soldiers' battle cries. I watched helplessly as centuries of history and faith ascended in smoke to an uncaring sky. Before the fire consumed everything, I forced my way into the Holy of Holies, that sacred chamber no gentle was permitted to enter. I stood in breathless awe before the emptiness. No statues, only simple, profound absence. I had expected treasure, but found something more valuable insight into the Jewish soul. Their God needed no image. This understanding came too late. Outside, the destruction continued unabated. My legionaries broke from formation, driven mad by bloodlust and greed. The gold melted between the stones, driving them to tear apart the very foundations. I struck several with the flat of my sword, attempting to restore order. My centurions rallied, but too many tasted plunder's sweetness. The discipline I prided myself on disintegrated before my eyes, replaced by savage instinct. That night, watching from my camp as the temple continued to burn, I questioned whether this destruction was truly necessary. Father would have approved. He always advocated complete subjugation of enemies. Yet something troubled my spirit. The Jews had lost their heart, their center. Such wounds never truly heal. Would they forever name me destroyer rather than conqueror? History rarely distinguishes between the two. Jerusalem fell completely 3 weeks later. We took thousands of prisoners and seized enough gold to fund Rome's treasury for years. I was proclaimed imperator by my troops, yet victory tasted like ash in my mouth. I told myself this brutality secured peace for future generations. When I returned to Rome, the Senate would commemorate this triumph with an arch, but they would celebrate a victory I remembered as something more complex, more haunting. The upper city fell like ripe fruit into our hands. House by house, street by street, we advanced with methodical precision. I ordered our legions to move in tight formation, shields locked as we pushed through narrow alleys. The defenders fought with the desperation of cornered animals, hurling anything they could find from rooftops. Their courage was admirable, yet futile. The outcome had been decided when the temple fell. I instructed my centurions to spare those who surrendered peacefully. "We are not barbarians," I told them. "Rome brings order, not senseless slaughter." Still, many Jews chose death over captivity. I watched an elderly man leap from a tower rather than submit. Such pride, such folly. I ordered certain structures preserved, those of architectural significance or potential use for our garrison. History would remember this conquest. My formal entry into Jerusalem was both triumph and tragedy. The eagles of Rome soared above me as I rode through streets littered with debris and bodies. My men hailed me as Imperator, yet I felt hollow amid such devastation. The city that had defied us lay broken, its grand structures charred ruins. I dismounted at what remained of Herod's palace, claiming it as headquarters. There, I ordered wine but found no taste for celebration. The captured Jewish leaders were brought before me in chains. I recognized some from previous negotiations, men who had rejected our terms of peace. How different they looked now, broken and humbled. I sentenced the most rebellious to death, others to slavery in Egypt's mines. A few, those who had counseled surrender earlier, I granted clemency. Justice required punishment, but wisdom demanded discretion in its application. "Tear down the walls except the western portion," I commanded. "Leave 3 towers standing as testament to what Rome overcame." These orders would shape Jerusalem's future, no longer a rebel stronghold, but a Roman outpost. I walked the perimeter that evening, watching as engineers marked structures for demolition. The setting sun painted the limestone blood red. Father would be pleased, yet I wondered if such destruction was truly necessary. That night, alone in my quarters, I contemplated what we had achieved. Jerusalem had fallen. The rebellion was crushed. Father's reign was secured and my own reputation enhanced. Yet at what cost? Thousands dead, a sacred city in ruins. Would history remember me as Titus the Merciful or Titus the Destroyer? The weight of empire pressed heavily upon my shoulders as I drafted my report to Rome. Some victories taste of ashes. I walked through the smoldering ruins of Jerusalem one final time, the acrid smoke still hanging in the air. The temple treasures lay before me, catalogued meticulously by my officers. The golden menorah, its 7 branches gleaming despite the ash that coated everything else. The table of the showbread, scrolls of their sacred laws. Each item was carefully recorded, wrapped, and prepared for the long journey to Rome. Selecting prisoners for the triumph required careful consideration. I chose Simon Bar-Giora and other rebel leaders who would best demonstrate the might of Rome to our citizens. Some would walk in chains before my chariot. Others would face execution as tradition demanded. I found myself wondering what thoughts occupied their minds as they faced their fate. Did they still believe their God would deliver them? Before departing, I issued final orders to the 10th Legion who would garrison the ruins. Maintain order, crush any remaining resistance. The words felt hollow as I gazed upon the devastation. Where a great city once stood, only broken stones remained. I wondered if Father would have approved of such complete destruction. The price of rebellion against Rome was clear, but at what cost to us all? The journey back was a procession of triumph through Syria and Egypt. In Alexandria, I was celebrated with games and feasts. The populace lined streets to glimpse the conqueror of Judea and the sacred treasures we transported. Yet even as I accepted their adulation, my mind returned to Jerusalem's burning walls and the faces of those we had conquered. Each night in my tent, I calculated the costs of our victory. Thousands of my men had fallen. Countless Jews had perished. The campaign had secured the eastern frontier, but I found myself haunted by the siege's final days, the screams, the starvation, the flames. Victory's sweetness was tinged with a bitterness I had not anticipated. Was this the burden all great men carried? Rome awaited me, and with it the triumph Father had promised. Our dynasty would be secured by Jerusalem's fall. The narrative was already being crafted. Titus, the conqueror, the worthy heir to Vespasian. As we drew closer to Italy, I practiced the face of the future emperor. Confident, merciful, yet firm, Jerusalem had forged me anew. I was no longer merely a general, but a man who understood power's true weight. The Mediterranean waves lapped against our vessel as we departed Judea's shores. My heart swelled with pride. Jerusalem had fallen, and I, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, had secured victory for Rome. The sea stretched before us like an azure road home, salt spray cooling my face as I gazed toward the horizon. Strange to leave behind the dust and blood of siege for this peaceful journey. Yet my thoughts remained in Jerusalem, with her. Alexandria welcomed me as a conquering hero. Officials prostrated themselves, offering exotic gifts and whispers of an Eastern crown independent of Rome. Rule here, they suggested, where your glory is already known. I declined with practiced diplomacy, though their words stirred dangerous ambition. My father was emperor now. My loyalty could not waver. Yet I wondered, had I been tested thus before Jerusalem, would my answer have been the same? Berenice awaited me in her private quarters, her dark eyes reflecting lamplight. "They say you refused a crown," she murmured, fingers tracing my battle scars. Our reunion was sweet, yet shadowed by reality. Rome would never accept a Jewish princess beside their future emperor. I held her close, knowing our paths must eventually diverge. She understood politics as well as I, perhaps better, yet still we clung to stolen moments. At each port, my reception changed. No longer was I merely General Titus, but Caesar's son and Rome's heir. Military commanders who once treated me as an equal now bowed deeply. Common people threw flowers and called blessings. A merchant in Cyprus whispered, "I shall tell my grandchildren I once sold wine to the future emperor." The weight of expectation settled on my shoulders, heavier than any armor I had worn. The siege of Jerusalem had been straightforward in its brutal simplicity: victory or defeat, life or death. Now I navigated currents of political intrigue. The Parthians grow restless, a provincial governor informed me over wine. The Germanic tribes test our northern borders. Each conversation became a test, each response measured for its implications. I found myself calculating words as carefully as I had once calculated troop deployments. The man who sailed for Rome was not the same who had departed for Judea. I had left as a general with something to prove. I returned as heir to an empire tempered by siege and victory. The waters darkened as Italy's coast appeared on the horizon. Rome awaited. My father, the Senate, triumph and power. I touched the scar across my palm, remembering Jerusalem's walls. Those stones had taught me the price of glory, lessons I would carry to the throne. Rome had never witnessed such elaborate preparations. For weeks, the city buzzed with activity as workers constructed wooden platforms along the sacred way, adorned with garlands and imperial banners. Father and I planned every detail meticulously. The Senate had decreed a joint triumph for us both, a rare honor that acknowledged our shared victory over Judea. I felt a strange mixture of pride and solemnity as I donned my ceremonial armor that morning. At dawn, Father and I mounted our matching white horses outside the triumphal gate. We led a procession that stretched for miles, senators in their togas, musicians playing victory hymns, and soldiers bearing standards. The crowd's roar was deafening as we entered the city. I noticed Father's eyes glisten with emotion, He had risen from obscurity to emperor, and now shared Rome's highest honor with his son. The thought that I stood as his heir became suddenly, overwhelmingly real. The treasures of Jerusalem drew gasps from the spectators. Carried on litters were the golden menorah with its 7 branches gleaming in the sunlight, the table of showbread, and silver trumpets. I had ordered these sacred objects displayed with dignity, though they represented our dominance. The crowd fell silent momentarily when the Torah scrolls passed. Even Romans sensed their significance. Behind these treasures walked the Jewish prisoners, their Prince Shimon among them, chains binding their wrists but heads held high. Most spectacular were the moving tableaux, scenes from our campaign recreated on wheeled platforms. One showed the breaching of Jerusalem's walls, another the burning temple. Actors portrayed the desperate defenders and victorious legionaries. I felt a pang watching these sanitized versions of the bloodshed I had witnessed. The crowds cheered each display of Roman might, oblivious to the true horrors of siege warfare. Yet I maintained my triumphant expression. This was politics as much as celebration. We ascended the steps to Jupiter's temple on the Capitoline Hill, the final destination of our procession. The temple gleamed with marble and gold, a fitting backdrop for our victory offerings. As tradition demanded, we waited while the executioners took Shimon bar Giora to the Mamertine prison. A messenger soon arrived, confirming the rebel leader's death. Only then could our sacrifice to Jupiter proceed. I felt the weight of Rome's ancient customs pressing upon me, brutal yet sacred obligations of leadership. As father and I poured libations on the altar, I understood that this triumph had transformed me. No longer merely Vespasian's son, I stood recognized as heir to the empire, proven in battle and celebrated by Rome itself. The smoke of sacrifice rose to the heavens, carrying our thanks to the gods. Yet privately, I wondered if Jerusalem's fall had been necessary in all its devastation. Such thoughts remained unspoken as we descended to the palace, where the feasting would continue long into the night. I summoned Rome's finest architects to my private chambers that spring morning. This victory must stand eternal, I told them, spreading the preliminary sketches across my marble table. The Jerusalem campaign deserved more than fleeting celebration. It warranted immortality in stone. I envisioned an arch unlike any other, standing at the sacred way's highest point, where all Romans would pass beneath my triumph for centuries to come. The master sculptor Severus showed me as clay models for the reliefs. Here, Caesar, the menorah and sacred vessels. His fingers traced the procession. I nodded, remembering the golden gleam of the temple treasures. This would be no ordinary monument. Each carved figure would tell our story. I insisted the soldiers' faces show their exhaustion and pride. Make them individuals, I commanded. They earn their place in stone. I visited the construction site weekly as the arch took form. The scaffolding rose like a wooden skeleton around the growing monument. The limestone blocks, hauled from the finest quarries, were lifted into place with ingenious pulleys. I often spoke with the stonemasons, men whose calloused hands were creating my legacy. Your children's children will walk beneath this arch, I told one young worker, who straightened with pride at my words. The treasury complained about the expense, but I silenced them with a wave. The spoils of Jerusalem build this monument, I reminded my advisors. The same wealth that began the Colosseum's foundation would ensure this arch stood as testament to Flavian glory. Father had understood the power of stone to speak across generations. Now I continued his vision, transforming Rome's skyline with monuments that proclaimed our dynasty's greatness. When the sculptors began the detailed reliefs, I spent hours watching them work. They captured the precise moment of triumph, our soldiers bearing the sacred treasures, the captives' downcast faces, my own figure riding victorious. I felt a strange melancholy, seeing Jerusalem's fall rendered permanent. How would history judge us? The victors write the story, but stone tells it forever. This arch would speak long after my voice fell silent. On the day the final stone was set, I gathered my commanders who had fought in Judea. Many wept seeing their deeds immortalized. We conquered together, I told them, and together we will be remembered. The arch stood complete, a gateway between past and future. Long after our bodies returned to dust, Romans would pass beneath it and whisper our names. In that stone, I had carved not just victory, but my place in Rome's eternal story. Father's cough grew worse with each passing month. By 77 AD, I found myself shouldering more of his duties while pretending not to notice how his hands trembled during morning councils. My appointment as Praetorian prefect placed the empire's security directly in my hands. I commanded the very guards who had once proclaimed my father emperor, a responsibility I did not take lightly. The transition from battlefield to Senate chamber required different weapons. Words replaced swords. Patience supplanted swift action. During my 7 consulships, I learned to navigate the labyrinth of senatorial politics. When to press forward, when to retreat, when to compromise. Father watched approvingly as I mastered these civil arts, though I sometimes longed for the clarity of military command. Our joint censorship brought Father and me closer than ever before. Together we reviewed the Senate's membership, managed the census, and oversaw public morality. We worked as equals, though I always deferred to him publicly. Behind closed doors, however, he increasingly sought my counsel. "You see problems before they arise," he told me once. I never had that gift. Domitian simmered with resentment. My younger brother prowled the palace margins, collecting slights both real and imagined. "When will I be granted meaningful authority?" he demanded one evening. I assured him his time would come, but saw the disbelief in his eyes. Father remained blind to this brewing storm, dismissing my concerns with a wave. "Brothers always compete," he said. "You'll reconcile when it matters." Berenice was my sanctuary amid these mounting pressures. Her intelligence and political insight proved invaluable. She had ruled her own lands, after all. Yet whispers grew louder about the Jewish queen's influence over Rome's future emperor. Public sentiment hardened against our union. With great reluctance, I finally asked her to leave Rome. She departed with dignity, though the pain in her eyes haunts me still. As Father's strength waned, I confronted my own inadequacies. Military command offered clear objectives, cities to capture, enemies to defeat. Governance was murkier, requiring patience I sometimes lacked. "The people expect spectacle and stability in equal measure," Father advised. "Give them both, but never forget which truly matters." I recorded his wisdom faithfully, preparing for the day his throne would become mine. The imperial court demanded a public persona of strength, but in private, I cultivated pleasures that nourished my spirit. Literature became my sanctuary. I would often retire to my chambers with scrolls of Virgil and Homer, losing myself in their epic tales until dawn broke. My father taught me that a true leader must understand the soul of his people, and what better way than through their greatest writings. These quiet hours with poetry prepared me for the eloquence expected of a prince. Music offered me solace that even the finest wines could not provide. I mastered the harp under Alexandrian tutors, practicing until my fingers bled the first months. At private gatherings, I would sometimes play, watching senators' surprise at finding Marshal Titus so delicate with strings. Berenice once told me my music revealed more of my soul than any speech. Perhaps she was right. The melodies expressed ambitions and fears I dared not voice, even in my most intimate circles. My dinner parties became legendary in Rome, not for excessive debauchery, but for the quality of conversation. I gathered poets, philosophers, and artists alongside generals and statesmen. The mingling of minds over exquisite Falernian wine produced ideas no council chamber could generate. I funded promising sculptors and commissioned works celebrating Rome's virtues rather than just its victories. Some called it wasteful, but I knew culture's power to unite where armies could only conquer. Berenice captured my heart when I least expected love's intrusion. Her intelligence matched her renowned beauty, and in her company I found myself speaking truths I revealed to no one else. The Roman public whispered about the Jewish queen who had enchanted their prince, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Those years with her taught me that personal happiness and political necessity rarely align. When duty finally forced our separation, I surrendered not just a lover, but the freedom to choose my own fate. The Circus Maximus became my escape from imperial pressures. I would arrive unannounced to watch the chariot races, wagering alongside ordinary citizens and cheering until hoarse. Once I even took the reins myself in a private race against friends, narrowly winning and nearly breaking my neck in the process. Father was furious, but the thrill of that victory, of controlling 4 thundering horses as one, stayed with me through many dreary meetings of state afterward. As years passed, I learned to balance duty with pleasure rather than separate them. The baths became my political salon. More policies were crafted amid steam and casual conversation than in formal sessions. I cultivated friendships with men of all ranks, remembering names of their children and their concerns. Some called it mere charm, but I recognized early that genuine connection builds stronger loyalty than fear. A prince who lives only for the state becomes a hollow vessel, unable to understand the people he governs. Father's illness came swiftly in June. I rushed to his bedside, abandoning all other duties. The physicians spoke in hushed tones, their faces betraying what words could not. At 69, Vespasian had ruled for a decade, transforming Rome from chaos to stability. Now, as I held his weakening hand, I faced the unthinkable, both losing my father and assuming sole responsibility for the empire we had governed together. Throughout those final days, Father's mind remained sharp, even as his body failed. A Roman emperor should die standing, he insisted, attempting to rise from his bed despite his weakness. We spoke of Rome, of the Flavian legacy, of my brother Domitian. Between discussions of state matters, he shared memories from his humble beginnings, stories I'd heard countless times, yet treasured anew, knowing each telling might be the last. On his final morning, Father summoned strength for his last jest. "Dear me, I think I'm becoming a god," he quipped with that familiar wry smile. Hours later, he was gone. I closed his eyes myself, a son's final duty. Grief threatened to overwhelm me, but Rome waited. I composed myself and stepped outside to address the Praetorian Guard, who proclaimed me emperor with unified voices. The transition we had prepared for years was now reality. The Senate confirmed my succession that same day. I entered the Curia, not as Vespasian's son, but as Imperator Titus Caesar Vespasianus Augustus. At 39, I had become the most powerful man in the world. My first official acts honored Father, declaring his deification and commissioning the Temple of Vespasian. The weight of the purple felt heavier without him beside me to share its burden. Father's funeral procession wound through Rome's streets as citizens lined the route, many weeping openly. I walked behind his bier, conscious of every eye upon me. The public mourning was genuine. He had been beloved for his plain speaking and fiscal prudence. During the ceremony, I maintained composure, though my heart shattered anew with each ritual performed. Rome needed strength from me now, not tears. In private that night, I finally allowed myself to grieve. Father had prepared me well, yet doubts crept in like shadows. Could I match his wisdom, his steady hand? Would the people embrace me as they had him? I unrolled his personal scrolls, reading his advice on governance. "Continue what we began," he had written. I made that my silent vow as dawn broke on my first full day as Rome's sole master. The day after Father's funeral, I awoke as Emperor of Rome. The weight of it struck me as I dressed in imperial purple for the first time, not as Vespasian's son, but as Titus Caesar. The Senate had confirmed me swiftly. There was no opposition. How could there be? I had governed alongside Father for years. Yet standing alone before the mirror, I felt a curious hollowness. No one to consult, no one to share the burden. My first address to the Senate remains vivid in memory. I stood where Augustus, Claudius, and Father had stood before. "Rome deserves justice and peace," I declared, "not suspicion and fear." The chamber erupted in applause when I announced the dismissal of informers and the end of treason trials. Some senators wept openly. Others looked skeptical, perhaps wondering if this was merely the customary opening act of a reign that would darken later. That first week, I summoned the Praetorian commanders individually. Loyalty must be secured early. With each man, I reviewed his record personally, recalled battles we had shared in Judea. "Rome's peace begins with you," I told them, increasing their pay while making clear my expectations. Most gratifying was meeting with Agricola before his departure to Britain, a commander who understood that Rome's greatness lay not just in conquest, but in bringing civilization. Domitian required careful handling. My brother had grown restless in Father's shadow, and now chafed in mine. I named him my heir publicly. What choice did I have? But kept real power distant from his grasp. "You'll have your time," I assured him during a private dinner, "but Rome needs stability now." His eyes revealed nothing, though his fingers tightened around his wine cup. I assigned him ceremonial duties. keeping him visible but contained. The people needed to see their emperor. I walked the forum without a heavy guard, stopped at the public baths, attended games without the elaborate protocols father had maintained. When petitioners approached, I listened rather than deferring them to officials. Remember this, I told my advisors, an emperor who cannot be seen cannot be loved. Some counseled caution, fearing assassination. I reminded them that distance from the people had killed more emperors than proximity. Alone in my chambers each night, doubts would surface like wraiths. Had I promised too much? Could I truly end the corruption that had seeped into every corner of governance? One evening, finding sleep elusive, I unrolled father's private journals, seeking guidance from his words. Rule as if each day might be judged by history, he had written. I decided then that generosity would define my reign. No citizen should leave the emperor's presence without hope. At last, my father's grand vision rose before me, complete. The Flavian amphitheater stood magnificent against the Roman sky, its travertine facade gleaming in the sunlight. I walked the perimeter daily during those final months, inspecting every detail, demanding perfection. The workers labored day and night under my watchful eye. This would be no ordinary structure, but a monument to Flavian glory that would stand for eternity. I decreed 100 days of games to celebrate its opening, unprecedented in scope and grandeur. The planning consumed me. I selected the finest gladiators from across the empire, commissioned exotic beasts from Africa and Asia, and designed spectacles no Roman had witnessed before. Each night I retired exhausted, my mind racing with details. Would it be enough? Would Rome understand the magnitude of what my family had achieved? The inaugural day arrived with perfect skies. I entered the imperial box to thunderous applause. Below me spread a sea of faces. 80,000 Romans gathered to witness history. My heart swelled with pride. The treasure from Judea had built this marvel, transforming the spoils of war into a gift for my people. My greatest military triumph now stood immortalized in stone and mortar. The gladiatorial combats began at dawn. I had selected pairs matched in skill to provide the greatest spectacle. The crowd roared with each decisive moment. I watched their faces. The senators nodding approval, the plebeians shouting with joy. This was governance through spectacle, a lesson my father had taught well. When I signaled mercy for a particularly valiant fighter, the amphitheater erupted in cheers. They loved me for my clemency. The arena was flooded on the 7th day, transforming into a vast lake before astonished eyes. Naval battles with real ships unfolded below, recreating famous victories of Rome. Later came the hunts. Hundreds of lions, elephants, and creatures many Romans had only heard of in tales. I spared no expense, importing beasts from the farthest reaches of our domains. The spectacles grew more elaborate with each passing day, each one a demonstration of Rome's mastery over the world. As the 100th day dawned, I felt a profound satisfaction unlike any military victory had provided. My father had begun this monument, but I had completed it, making it grander than even he had envisioned. The Flavian name was now etched permanently in Rome's landscape. When I walked among the people during the final celebrations, their adoration confirmed what I had known. This amphitheater had secured our dynasty's legacy more effectively than 1,000 battlefield triumphs. The messenger arrived as I dined, his face ashen with horror. "Vesuvius has erupted, Caesar. Pompeii and Herculaneum. They're gone." My cup clattered to the floor. Just 2 months into my reign, and now this. I rose immediately. "Prepare my retinue. We leave for Campania at dawn." That night I could not sleep, haunted by visions of citizens crying out for their emperor's aid. I would not fail them. The journey south revealed increasing devastation. Ash coated everything like gray snow, thicker as we approached. When we reached the Bay of Naples, the scene defied comprehension. The mountain still smoldered, a malevolent god that had devoured entire towns. The air burned my lungs. Bodies lay half buried in ash, frozen in their final moments. I wept openly, caring not who witnessed the emperor's tears. I established headquarters in a villa spared by the winds. "Bring me the survivors," I commanded. They came in scores, ash-covered specters with hollow eyes. I clasped their hands, these citizens who had lost everything. "Rome has not abandoned you," I promised each one. That night, I drafted orders until dawn, appointing 2 ex-consuls to coordinate recovery and authorize an immediate funds from my personal treasury. For 10 days, I slept little, ate less. I walked among the ruins, directing soldiers to search for survivors. "Dig here," I would say, following instinct more than reason. Sometimes we found only corpses, but twice, miraculously, living souls. When a centurion suggested abandoning the search, I silenced him with a glare. "We continue until every stone is turned. This is what Rome means now. We leave no one beneath the ash." I decreed that property of those who died without heirs would fund reconstruction. "Build stronger than before," I instructed the architects I summoned from Rome. When an advisor whispered concerns about the treasury, I cut him short. What use is an empire's wealth, if not for this? The people needed more than buildings, though. They needed hope. Each evening I dined with survivors, listening to their stories, promising a future beyond this great devastation. When I finally returned to Rome, the Senate praised my swift response. I accepted their accolades with humility, knowing praise meant nothing compared to the faces of those I'd helped. My father had won his reputation through conquest. I found mine in reconstruction. The disaster tested me as no military campaign could have. In those ash-covered fields, I discovered what kind of emperor I wished to be. One who built rather than destroyed, who served rather than commanded. The gods tested me again. 3 days after the calends of July, fire erupted near the capital. I awoke to frantic messengers. Rome burned. Unlike Nero, who fiddled from afar, I rushed to the flames. The night sky glowed crimson as I organized the Praetorians into firefighting brigades. "An emperor must be first in danger," I told Domitian when he urged caution. The acrid smoke burned my lungs as I worked alongside common men, passing buckets through the night. For 3 relentless days, I never left the disaster. Sleep came in brief moments against scorched walls. When the temple of Jupiter began to burn, I wept openly. The Pantheon, Pompey's theater, structures that defined Rome's greatness, devoured by insatiable flames. "The buildings can be rebuilt," I declared, opening the treasury. Lives cannot be replaced. I ordered my own villas opened to shelter the homeless and commanded that grain stores be distributed without delay. The parallels to Nero's fire 17 years earlier escaped no one. Whispers followed me. Will Titus blame the Christians too? I silenced such talk. Nature and fate are enemies enough without creating more, I told my advisors. When finally the flames died, I toured the devastation personally, not from a litter, but on foot. I touched the hands of those who lost everything. Their tears soaked my tunic as I promised Rome would rise again. Each night after the fire, exhaustion crushed me. 2 disasters in 2 years. I confided to my journal, Vesuvius, and now this. My physicians worried as I refused rest, working through plans for reconstruction. I established a special fire relief fund from my personal fortune. Take the marble meant for my new palace, I ordered the architects. The people need homes before I need more luxury. The Senate protested, claiming an emperor must live grandly. I silenced them with a glare. At dawn each day, I appeared before the people, not in imperial purple, but in the simple toga of a citizen. I suffer as you suffer, I told the crowds at the forum. We rebuild together. When food grew scarce, I reduced my own table first. The sight of an emperor eating soldiers' bread quieted many complaints. I organized the guilds to clear debris and rebuild. Even my brother Domitian looked at me differently. Was it newfound respect or deeper resentment? I had no time to ponder. The fire changed me more than it changed Rome. I realized that marble monuments matter less than the people who build them. An emperor's true legacy is not in stone, but in the lives he touches, I wrote as reconstruction began. When the Senate proposed a triumphal arch celebrating my fire relief efforts, I redirected the funds to orphanages. The gods had sent me another harsh lesson in leadership, and I was determined to prove a worthy student. Rome would rise from ashes stronger, as would I. The plague arrived like a silent assassin, while Rome still mourned its fire-scorched districts. I first heard reports from the eastern quarters. Fever, pustules, death within days. Each morning brought messengers with grimmer tallies. Another 100 lost in the Subura, Caesar. I ordered the imperial physicians to examine the afflicted and establish quarantine houses in each district. The gods were testing us beyond measure. First fire, then Vesuvius. Now this invisible enemy that respected neither rank nor virtue. I led the public sacrifices myself as Pontifex Maximus, offering white bulls to Apollo the healer. The crowds watched with desperate hope as I raised blooded hands skyward, pleading for divine intervention. Privately, I doubled the efforts of more practical measures, ordering the removal of bodies before decay, distributing vinegar for cleansing, and commanding the aqueduct supervisors to ensure fresh water flowed to all districts. Faith and action together might save us where either alone would fail. Against the urgent counsel of my Praetorian prefect, I visited the afflicted in the poorest quarters. Let them see their emperor shares their peril, I told him. The stench of sickness hung heavy in those narrow streets. I knelt beside the dying, touched fevered brows, and promised imperial aid to orphaned children. A woman clutched my hand and whispered, "Now I can die having seen Caesar's face." I returned to the palace each night, wondering if I too carried death within me. I assembled Rome's finest physicians in the imperial library. "Speak freely," I commanded. "What remedies might work?" They debated theories of miasma and humoral imbalance. Some advocated bleeding, others herbal infusions. I ordered all suggestions implemented where they showed promise. The treasury emptied as I funded public baths with healing herbs, distributed medicinal wine, and established convalescent homes. My father's financial prudence would have been tested, but what use is a treasury if the people perish? Each morning I asked, how many lost yesterday? Each evening I asked, how many new cases reported? The numbers became a grim ritual, marking the rhythm of my days alongside state papers and military dispatches. I began to see my reign defined not by triumphs, but by catastrophes. The whispers reached me that I was cursed, that the gods themselves opposed my rule. Yet, what choice had I but to continue? An emperor who abandons his people at their darkest hour deserves neither crown nor memory. Gradually, mercifully, the plague began to recede. Whether from our efforts or the gods' mercy, I cannot say. I ordered public games to revive the people's spirits, not the bloody spectacles my brother favored, but comedies, races, and musical contests. Rome has endured, I told the Senate, and so shall we all. Yet, in private moments, I wondered what trial would next befall us. An emperor learns his true character not in victory parades, but in the relentless struggle against fate's cruelest challenges. No citizen should live in audience with the emperor disappointed. I made this my daily commitment upon taking the throne. After witnessing Nero's excesses and my father's occasional severity, I resolved to rule differently. Each morning I opened the palace doors to petitioners from all walks of life, merchants seeking tax relief, mothers pleading for their sons, veterans requesting pensions. My attendants often sighed at the lengthy queues, but I reminded them, the people's concerns cannot wait while an emperor rests. The treason laws had become a weapon to destroy political rivals. I ordered them revised, declaring that criticism of the emperor was no crime against Rome. When my advisors presented a list of suspected plotters, I refused to sign execution orders without irrefutable evidence. An emperor who kills from fear admits his weakness, I told the Senate. Many nights I stayed awake reviewing cases personally, searching for reasons to grant clemency rather than reasons to condemn. One evening, after granting no petitions due to military matters, I pushed away my dinner untouched. I have wasted a day, I confessed to my brother Domitian, who seemed puzzled. What emperor deserves his power if he has done nothing to ease his people's burdens? This philosophy guided me daily. The treasury officials complained of my generosity after floods damaged Rome, but I countered that the imperial coffers existed to serve Romans in need, not to glorify the emperor with marble monuments. Critics whispered that I purchased popularity through excessive generosity. Titus empties the treasury to fill his vanity, I overheard a senator remark. Perhaps there was truth in this. Yet I remembered walking through Rome as a child, seeing the fear in people's eyes when imperial guards passed. An emperor feared is powerful for a day. An emperor loved is powerful for generations, I wrote in my private journals, though I sometimes doubted whether such idealism could survive Rome's brutal politics. Balancing generosity with governance proved my greatest challenge. When I pardoned 2 patricians who had conspired against me, inviting them to dine at my table instead. My prefect warned I invited my own assassination. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I would rather die as a merciful emperor than live as a tyrant. Still, I was no fool. I ensured the conspirators understood my clemency came with vigilance. Mercy required strength, not weakness, and I learned to temper compassion with necessary firmness. My predecessors ruled through distance and fear, but I sought to create a new imperial model. Each time I walked among crowds without guards, my advisors trembled. Each pardon I granted was met with warnings of appearing weak. Yet in those brief years of my reign, I witnessed something remarkable. Citizens approaching me without terror, speaking honestly of their needs. The delight of mankind, they called me. I knew not whether this new path would endure beyond my time, but I was determined it would define my legacy. Domitian, my brother, my shadow, my successor. The gods granted us the same blood but different souls. While I sought to win hearts through generosity, he cultivated fear through silence. During those early days of my reign, I invited him to share my consulship, placed his statue throughout Rome, declared him my heir. Yet I watched his eyes carefully. They never reflected gratitude, only calculation. Brother, you understand these military matters better than I, Domitian once said during a council meeting, his voice dripping with false deference. I recognized the trap. He hoped I would dismiss his capabilities before the Senate. Instead, I praised his administrative talents while keeping command of the Praetorian Guard firmly in my own hands. The dance between us was delicate, exhausting. Our temperaments clashed like gladius against shield. Where I sought consensus, Domitian demanded obedience. The people need a firm hand, he argued one evening as we walked the palace gardens. Your mercy will be seen as weakness. I replied that mercy was not weakness, but strength. He smiled thinly, unconvinced. I wondered then if the lessons of our father had taken root differently in each of us. I tried to mentor him, to prepare him for the burden he would one day bear. Study the people as carefully as you study your scrolls, I advised, placing him in charge of petitions to observe how Romans of all ranks expressed their needs. He performed the task diligently, but without warmth. The petitioners left feeling judged rather than heard. Later, I demonstrated how to turn these encounters into bonds of loyalty. You will never trust me with real authority while you live, Domitian accused after I overruled his harsh judgment against a senator's son. His eyes flashed with rare emotion. I am kept as a figurehead, nothing more. The truth in his words stung. I placed my hands on his shoulders. I trust you with Rome's future, I told him. That is why I must prepare you properly. He pulled away, unconvinced. I lay awake many nights contemplating Rome's fate after my death. History taught harsh lessons about succession. Tiberius after Augustus, Nero after Claudius. I strengthened our dynasty publicly while privately harboring doubts. Would Domitian rule with justice or tyranny? I could shape him, guide him, but not control him. The final chapters of the Flavian story would be written by his hand alone, not mine. The women in my life shaped me in ways the Senate and battlefield never could. My first wife, Arsina Tertulla, came to me in youth, daughter of a Praetorian prefect. Our marriage was brief before the gods took her. I still remember her gentle wisdom, how she would counsel patience when my temper flared. In those early days, before the weight of Rome pressed upon my shoulders, she showed me that strength could exist in quietude. After mourning Tertulla, I married Marcia Fernilla, a woman of noble birth whose family connections bolstered my standing. She bore me my daughter Julia, my greatest treasure. Yet politics soon poisoned what affection we built. Her family's ties to opposition against my father forced our separation. I allowed her to keep her dowry and dignity, but Julia remained with me, the sole light in those dark days after my father seized power. Then came Berenice of Judea, beautiful, brilliant Berenice. 10 years my senior, yet possessing a sharp mind that challenged mine at every turn. A queen in her own right, she understood power as few women could. During the Jewish campaign, she became my confidant, then my lover. I brought her to Rome, installed her near the palace, and dreamed impossible dreams of making a foreign queen my empress. Rome would not have her. The whispers grew too loud, accusations of Eastern corruption, of falling under a Jewish spell. When I became emperor, I made the choice that haunts me still. I sent her away. For reasons of state, the official declaration read. In private, I wept as I had not since boyhood. She departed with dignity, her final glance holding neither hatred nor forgiveness, only understanding. Power demands sacrifices that cut to the bone. My daughter Julia became my heart's refuge. I spared no expense for her education, teaching her to read Greek and appreciate poetry as my father had taught me. I had grand plans to arrange a marriage that would secure the dynasty, but watched with pride as she developed her mother's beauty and her grandfather's shrewdness. The women of my family, my sister Domitilla, my nieces, formed a formidable circle of influence at court. I learned from these women that power wears many guises. My mother, Domitilla, though never formally educated, managed our household with diplomatic skill that would impress any senator. From Berenice, I learned that governance requires both justice and mercy. From Julia, I discovered the fierce desire to build a better world for those who follow us. Men may write the histories, but women shape the men who make that history. In this, I count myself fortunate beyond measure. Standing atop the Palatine Hill, I surveyed what would be my greatest legacy to Rome. The Flavian amphitheater rose majestically before me, its travertine facade gleaming in the morning light. Father had begun this monument, but it fell to me to complete it. I walked its corridors daily, instructing the architects on every detail. This was not merely stone and mortar, it was our family name carved into the eternal fabric of Rome. When fire ravaged Rome in my second year as emperor, I wept not just for the lost temples, but for the wounds in our city's sacred memory. I declared immediately that my personal fortune would fund the rebuilding. The temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, the Pantheon, the baths, all would rise again, more magnificent than before. In their restoration, I sought to heal more than buildings. I sought to restore Roman confidence in the divine favor of our reign. I learned from Augustus that an emperor who finds Rome brick should leave it marble. My baths near the ruins of Nero's golden house rose quickly, a deliberate statement. Where Nero built for himself, I built for the people. The vast complex would serve all Romans, regardless of status. The water flowed equally for senator and plebeian alike. In this equality of access to luxury, I made manifest the Flavian ideal of governance. Architecture speaks when men's voices have long fallen silent. I chose the Corinthian order for my public works, its ornate capitals suggesting abundance and prosperity after years of civil strife. I commissioned reliefs showing Rome's victories, but also scenes of peace and commerce. The message carved in stone was clear. The Flavian peace brought not just security, but flourishing. I wanted future generations to walk through colonnades and know this was a time of renewal. Will they remember my name in 1,000 years? Perhaps not. But they will stand in the shadow of my amphitheater and feel its grandeur. They will bathe in waters I channeled into the city. The stone speaks without words, telling of a time when Rome healed its wounds and built toward eternity. I chose materials that would endure, travertine that hardens with age, concrete that strengthens underwater, bronze that patinas but never fails. I dedicated the amphitheater with games lasting 100 days. As I watched the spectacles from the imperial box, my thoughts turned not to the cheering crowds, but to the centuries ahead. Would they understand what we built here? Not just arenas and temples, but a vision of Rome renewed after fire, war, and tyranny. In every cornerstone and column, I planted seeds of memory, a harvest I would never see, but one I tended with the devotion of a farmer to his fields. The fever struck without warning in September. One morning I woke drenched in sweat, my limbs heavy as stone. The court physicians exchanged worried glances as they examined me. "It will pass, Caesar," they assured, but their eyes betrayed concern. I dismissed them with a wave, determined not to show weakness. Rome needed her emperor strong. Yet, as I struggled through that day's Senate meeting, the world seemed to blur at its edges. Days passed, and the illness tightened its grip. My brother Domitian watched me with calculating eyes during council meetings. Was that concern or ambition I glimpsed? At 41, I had expected many more years to secure my legacy. "We should postpone the northern campaign," Agricola suggested gently. I refused. "An emperor works until his final breath," I declared, though each word drained me further. That night, alone, I wept briefly for all I might not complete. By the 3rd week, standing became an ordeal. My physician, Apollonius, finally spoke the truth. "Caesar, you must retire to the countryside. The air of Rome aggravates your condition." I saw death in his eyes. The journey to our family estate at Aquae Cutilii was a blur of pain and fevered dreams. The litter bearers moved with excruciating care, yet each jolt sent agony through my frame. The Sabine hills emerged through my fever haze, promising a peace I began to crave. At Aquae Cutilii, my sister Domitilla sat beside my bed, her fingers cool against my burning brow. "You've done enough, brother," she whispered. "Rome will remember you well." I thought of Jerusalem's fall, the Colosseum's opening, the relief efforts after Vesuvius. Had I truly redeemed our family name? 2 years is not enough, I rasped. The people needed more time to forget Nero's shadow. She smiled sadly. "They already have. They call you the delight of mankind." I summoned my strength to dictate final instructions. "Ensure the Eastern grain shipments continue uninterrupted," I told my secretary. "Complete the public baths as designed." My voice faltered. "And tell Domitian." What could I tell my brother that would matter now? Our relationship had always been strained by his ambition. Tell him I wish him wisdom. That night, I dreamed of my father. Vespasian stood before me, not as emperor, but as the simple soldier I'd known in childhood. "You've done well, son," he said simply. The physicians offered no more false hope. "It will be soon, Caesar," the eldest said. Strange how calm I felt at the pronouncement. I asked to be carried outside one last time, to feel the September sun. Looking up at the vast sky, I remembered a philosophy lesson from youth. We are but actors on a stage, playing our parts before exiting. My role had been brief, but meaningful. My only true regret was leaving so much unfinished. "I have made but one mistake," I whispered to the heavens. I had such grand designs for Rome's harbor at Ostia. The plans lay rolled on my desk, an expanded port with deeper channels to accommodate more grain ships, warehouses that would double our storage capacity. The architects had already begun preliminary surveys. With these improvements, no Roman would ever go hungry again, even in the leanest years. Now, those drawings gather dust, awaiting another's hand to bring them to life, if ever they shall. The eastern frontier required a more permanent solution than temporary military campaigns. I had conceived a network of fortifications and diplomatic alliances to secure those borders for generations. My generals and I spent countless nights mapping strategies that would bring lasting peace to Syria and Judea. The Parthians would have been contained without constant bloodshed. How different our empire's future might have been with secured eastern boundaries. My greatest legislative reform remained unimplemented, a comprehensive codification of Roman law. For too long, our legal system had grown unwieldy, with contradictions that confused even the most learned jurists. I had assembled a team of the finest legal minds to create a single, coherent body of law. This would have been my most enduring legacy, bringing justice and clarity to every corner of our domains. The Senate and I had just begun to forge a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than suspicion. I intended to restore more of their traditional authority while maintaining imperial stability, a delicate balance my father began. In private meetings with influential senators, I had outlined a vision where they would become true partners in governance. Now, those conversations will fade into memory. Those senators perhaps wondering if I ever meant what I proposed. My planned aqueduct would have brought fresh water to the poorest districts of Rome. The engineers had solved the elevation challenges that had made previous attempts impossible. Construction was to begin next spring. Clean water for all Romans, not just the wealthy, would have transformed public health throughout the city. The fever that now claims me would have claimed fewer of my people had I been granted time to complete this work. I find solace knowing what we did accomplish in my brief reign. The Colosseum stands complete. The disaster at Vesuvius was met with imperial compassion, not indifference. Yet I cannot help but wonder how history might have judged Titus had I ruled for 20 years instead of 2. Perhaps it is better this way, to be remembered for what was done rather than for dreams unrealized. The gods grant each emperor his season. Mine was shorter than most, but not without glory. The fever took me swiftly, like Jerusalem had fallen. As I lay on my deathbed, my thoughts returned to that fateful day when smoke billowed from the temple. I had not meant for it to burn. The golden edifice, magnificent even as it crumbled, haunted me still. My soldiers had disobeyed orders in their frenzy, yet the victory was mine to bear. The glory and the shame of it both would follow me into eternity. Father would have been proud of the general, disappointed in the man. I conquered Jerusalem as Vespasian's son, but ruled Rome with my own heart. Those walls fell beneath our might, yet the memory of weeping women and slaughtered priests never left me. I once told Domitian that I regretted not saving more lives that day. My brother merely laughed, calling me soft. Perhaps I was. Perhaps that softness was my truest strength. They will remember me for Jerusalem, though it was but days in a life of years. Will they recall how I opened the imperial treasury after Vesuvius erupted? Or how I completed the Colosseum, giving Rome her greatest monument? I built baths for the common people and dismissed informers from my court. Yet history has a strange way of reducing men to single moments. One burning temple outshines 1,000 good deeds. I was a son who pleased his father, a brother who failed to tame his sibling's ambition. I was a father whose daughter survived me, carrying what little remained of my gentleness. As a general, I was ruthless. As emperor, merciful. I have made no man weep during my reign, I once boasted. Yet I had made thousands weep before it. The scales of my life, are they balanced? The gods alone can judge. Rome will endure without me. The eternal city outlasts all her children, even emperors. I leave her stronger than I found her, though my brother's shadow looms. Domitian has always hungered for what was mine. Will he preserve my works, or destroy them to forge his own legacy? I should have been firmer with him, but blood ties weakened my resolve. Some battles cannot be won with swords or fire. The darkness gathers now. Strange how calm I feel. They will deify me, place my statue among the gods, but what awaits the man behind the marble? I see the temple again, flames licking its walls. The rabbi I spared told me their god had no form, needed no temple. Perhaps there is wisdom there. As my breath grows shallow, I wonder, does the soul have weight? Will mine be lighter or heavier for what I've done? I am ready to learn the answer.